All right, let's go through the PasswordSafe SRA integration setup tasks. First, I wanted to highlight that the integration is very well documented on our documentation portal. Navigate to BeyondTrust.com/docs, go to privileged remote access or remote support, and then under how to, you can find the different steps that are required for the integration. Well, let's level set here, just looking at a couple slides before we get into some more details. The core of the integration is the endpoint credential manager. Ultimately, that's there to remove the need to share or expose credentials to your SRA users, your vendors, contractors by retrieving credentials from the PasswordSafe vault and then injecting them as part of the remote sessions. The ECM actually interfaces between both products, PasswordSafe and SRA, using the REST API interfaces on both sides. The ECM can be installed externally, and it just requires a Windows system, doesn't have to be a server, as can be a client, 64-bit, and you see some of the requirements below. Ultimately, the SRA integration then pulls the credentials from PasswordSafe at runtime so that the logged on SRA users can then access those credentials. You'd be presented with a list of credentials that one has access and approval to use, and then we can inject them as part of remote connections in the SRA products. And the benefit here again is that PasswordSafe owns those credentials, right? They're centrally stored. No matter who is going to engage in proxy or remote sessions, the credentials are always stored in PasswordSafe. That's where they're checked out. That's where they're checked back in, and where we can ensure that they're being rotated after use or based on a schedule. And now we have a central repository for all of the auditing and logging and reporting. This session here actually is using the built-in integration of the ECM, the credential endpoint credential manager. So this here is a screenshot of Beyond Insight configuration. This is also the home of PasswordSafe, and there is a quote-unquote new configuration item called Secure Mode Access, and then connect to Secure Mode Access. This is where you configure your integration with your SRA product. So essentially telling PasswordSafe, hey, this is your SRA backend that will be allowed to communicate with the API in order to check out credentials as part of remote sessions. So we have a URL connector here, port, client and API key, but that's pretty much it. It simplifies the integration between those products quite significantly. Now, the first most important aspect for the integration to work is to allow the credentials to be accessed via the API. So let's have a look at PasswordSafe. I'm already logged in here. I'm at the Managed Account sections, and looking at one of the accounts that can be used in PRA or remote support sessions for injection, mdavis-adm. Any account that you want to make available on the SRA side for authentication for credential injection has to be accessible via the API. So here under account settings, the slider API enabled has to be turned on. This is the very basic, most important requirement for the integration to work. Number two, the user has to exist on both sides. So we have a vendor user. That user has to be set up on both sides, in PasswordSafe and on the SRA side. These accounts have to match. If I have a user M Davis that user account has to exist in PasswordSafe and on the SRA side. They have to match for the integration to work. The next important part is for the integration to having the right access on the SRA side. So in my case here, I'm logged onto my PRA interface, and in here under management, we have the API configuration. And you can see here that I have an API account, so to speak, called ECM integration, right? This is what the PasswordSafe integration will use. This is where we get the auth client ID and the client secret that we, again, use as part of the PasswordSafe configuration. All right. In PasswordSafe itself, it is pretty straightforward now. Again, simplifying the setup using the built-in configuration. We hop over here to the configuration, go down to Secure Remote Access. We have Connect to Secure Remote Access. And again, this is where I would enter the values that we just created from the API connector on the SRA side. Now, the one thing that is helpful to troubleshoot the integration is, of course, our log files. So if you're running a virtual appliance, the UVM to host PasswordSafe, then you would log on to the appliance and you access the log file folder. Just gonna get ready to get into my UVM here to show what I'm talking about. And there's a folder on the C drive under program files that we can access to examine any possible issues here with the integration. So it all comes back to the locally installed ECM, and here on the program files, we go to the BOMGAR subfolder, we have the ECM folder, and then within here we have 2 log files, but mostly for operational troubleshooting, the ECM.log is the log that you want to look at if anything is not working correctly, if users get an error message or credentials aren't showing up. This is the log file you want to look at. So let's have a look at how it actually looks like when we're actually performing tasks with the integration enabled. Let me log in here as a vendor user. Of course, we're protecting that with multi-factor authentication. So after Martha here authenticates with her given username and password, she has to enter the MFA key. And once we're logged in, we then have access to the connections, to the assets that we're entitled to. So here, if we pick one connection here and initiate a jump, now the next step would be the authentication process. And this is where the PasswordSafe integration comes into play. Right? With the integration, Martha here can select her personal privileged account, in this case an Active Directory. Once we confirm, now SRA performs the authentication in the background. It checks out the correct password for this account from PasswordSafe and authenticates us to this Windows system now. We're now logged in as mdavis-80.